to the quantum mechanics.
Yes, we are the Quantum Mechanics, the paranormal podcast for the believers, the doubters, and everybody in between.
We are indeed, yes. It's we've got a jam-packed episode this week, man.
Is it really jam-packed? Are we going to have to sort of get a picnic?
It is picnic friendly.
Well, so you've been going into this for a while, haven't you? This particular book. I'm not quite sure what it's about. It's best if you don't tell me before we get into it.
Yeah. I won't. No, it's weird. It's it kind of segues on from a few little bits I've done over the last few episodes, and I just thought, somebody's name kept coming up, and I thought I'm going to delve deeper into that, and got their book, and I've just been obsessed with it since. And today we're going to look at the book, but I literally am just covering a very small section of what's included. So yeah.
Okay, well, I'm excited for that. I don't have anything that's happened to me this week that is remotely interesting for this podcast. It's been quite a low paranormal week.
Okay, well, let's get straight into the podcast then.
Let's do it.
That's the worst, what's it called, bait and tease that I've ever heard.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. It was like, I bet you're glad you tuned in now, aren't you? Yeah.
Well, Ben, generally, when we think about the word magic, it conjures up two possible thoughts or definitions.
Conjures.
See what I did there? Either wizards and witches, like Harry Potter, or Gandalf from Lord of the Rings, who's probably my favourite. I love a bit of Gandalf. Mm-hmm. Or we think of illusionists or performers like Harry Houdini or Derren Brown. What they both share, really, is it's not real. It's a fiction intended to entertain or amuse us, right?
Yeah, it's a story with a clever visual intrigue.
Well, there is a third type of magic that has been suppressed or perhaps even lost over time. Real magic.
What sometimes is differentiated with a K at the end in the spell.
It is. It's got it's almost got a satanic end to that. So I think people are a bit loath to use it with a K. But let's keep it with a C, because we're not going to get into things satanic. Well, we might do a little bit. It leads me to the book that I've just been talking about.
I'm putting this black candle away then.
Yeah, put the candle away. Now, the connection that I was mentioning earlier, we briefly mentioned the other week in the episode about cold spots in haunted houses, this kind of, drop in temperature. We mentioned Dean Radin. Now, just to remind you, Dean Radin is Chief Scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, an Associate Distinguished Professor of Integral and Transpersonal Psychology at the California Institute of Integral Studies.
I bet he just gives out a business card.
Yeah, I don't think he could print all that on a business card, could he?
He needs the name equivalent of a short URL.
He really does. Now, as well as being a renowned author of the kind of books we like to talk about on the podcast, he also has an amazing track record of conducting scientific experiments into what we might call the paranormal, but he might describe as magic.
Very nice.
In fact, in many ways, Ben, the book we're going to talk about I felt like it was trying to reclaim the word magic from being about fantasy and trickery into a word that should also be associated with, I guess, natural phenomenon that has been somewhat lost or repressed.
Yes.
Yeah, so in that case, it's magic that can be scientifically proved as real, and that's what we're going to get into today. So the book itself is titled Real Magic. The subtitle is Ancient Wisdom, Modern Science, and a Guide to the Secret Power of the Universe.
I've never heard of magic being provable by science. This is... Because the closest I've sort of come was, the CIA files and Uri and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But this feels very different.
Yeah, it kind of is. It does touch upon some of that stuff. I mean, let's have a look at what Radin means when they use the term real magic. They write, real magic falls into three categories: mental influence over the physical world, perception of events distant in space and time, and interactions with non-physical entities. So they're his three main categories. The first type I'll call, this is the author talking, force of will. It's associated with spell casting and other techniques meant to intentionally influence events or actions. The second is divination. It's associated with practices such as tarot cards and mirror gazing. The third is theurgy. I always wonder if I'm saying this right. Theurgy? From the Greek meaning God work, it involves methods for evoking and communicating with spirits.
Okay, I don't think I've heard of that word. So
Yeah, Theurgy. Theurgy?
I imagine Mistress Ruth is going to pop along any moment and tell us how we got that
We'll
wrong.
get clarification.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, he says, first, based on the substantial body of experimental evidence, we can state with a high degree of confidence that real magic exists. Second, there are rising trends in science suggesting that what was once called magic is poised to evolve into a new scientific discipline, just as medieval astrology and alchemy evolved into today's astronomy and chemistry. The new discipline will be the study of the psychophysical nature of reality, that mysterious interstitial space shimmering between mind and matter, understanding how this enigmatic space works in a way that's consistent with the rest of science requires a new worldview, the lens through which we can understand reality.
Gosh, that's
some
quite
big
an
stuff
undertaking.
there.
Yeah.
Now, the first part of the book really looks at the history of what he would call true magic abilities, which Radin believes we were in tune with, and how this knowledge, these abilities, have been suppressed or ignored over time. I'm not going to outline the history in detail, partly because I think we've talked about these themes before on the podcast, but mainly because given the amount of detail and research the author has gone into, I couldn't begin to do it justice in this podcast. It'd probably take a whole series. I'd really recommend the book just for that bit alone, which is not the whole thing. But it's such a really well detailed account of the history of quote unquote real magic.
Right.
But the post-it note summary, real magic has been suppressed, firstly by mainly orthodox religions. I mean, the key themes are these types of what we would regard as real magic were prominent, even every day in, paganism, other cultures. But organised religion then suppressed or outlawed these practices. You think of the Inquisition, they became heresy, right?
I see, yeah.
Or, as we've talked about before, religions appropriated them. If you're going to be an organised religion, you want to own magic, right?
Yes. And we spoke before about so places in France in the medieval period where sorcerers became separate from society, and there were, well, not from society, but there was a force of sorcerers who were basically just magicians and herbalists and perhaps people who were practicing what you're talking about now.
Yeah.
And the church could either choose to accept them and embrace them and incorporate them, or push them away. And in France, they embraced them, and that turned into a bunch of stories that we had a few, maybe about a year ago.
Yeah. And then, Ben, real magic kind of gets struck by a second wave of suppression, the rise of scientific thinking. So real magic, I guess we could describe it in this context as psi, was, and in Radin's view, is still problematic for the mainstream scientific community. I mean, this is something we've also talked a lot on the podcast about, but I just wanted to highlight a few points Radin makes regarding this. He says, it's quite funny, the saddest people on earth are junior faculty hoping to get a tenure at a university because they're forbidden to smile in public, crack jokes, or make eye contact, and they absolutely can't be seen as being even mildly interested in tabloid stories. He says it's the kiss of death to put one's 20-plus years of education and training in jeopardy by being perceived as too sympathetic about controversial topics. The upshot of this social taboo is that most academic scientists avoid parapsychology as though it was a virulent strain of a zombie plague. If they are secretly interested in psi, and many are, they first swear everyone's secrecy, then they approach it slowly while wearing a full hazmat suit with multiple alibis set up in advance to provide plausible deniability. He says, this is a pity because parapsychology involves the application of orthodox science and scholarly methods to a class of commonly reported, but as yet poorly understood human experience. It's a really good point.
Yeah.
He said, that's all it is. The topic studied might give some people allergic fits, but the methods used are transparent and completely orthodox. Now, he says a Gallup poll, this is a really good point, a Gallup poll in 2005 showed that nearly 75% of Americans believed in at least one paranormal phenomenon, like psi, but a mere 0.001% of academic scientists are actively engaged in studying the reality of these experiences.
Well, I mean, that's something we've always spoken about on this podcast, because, I mean, it's quite right. As soon as you say, I want to study ghosts, your funding dries up and people laugh at you. I mean, we've had that, we famously... We didn't famously come up with it, but Timothy Good famously came up with that term, the giggle factor, when trying to study UFOs. So, yeah, I see exactly where he's coming from.
Yeah, we've got some examples of that coming up, actually. Now, he says, while many scientists are quick to dismiss magical thinking as nonsense, the fact is that practically everyone engages in magical thinking all of the time. To account for this, psychologists have proposed 4 main explanations. This is, I guess, to counter these beliefs. Believers are wretchedly ignorant or sadly embedded with a religious culture that regards magic to be self-evident. So that's one explanation people give. 2, believers are burdened with one or more cognitive or reasoning defects. 3, believers are mentally ill. Or 4, everyone's brains are just hardwired to believe in magic. I guess, some degree, it's pareidolia or whatever, I'm saying, Now, Ben, what Radin lays out in the book is that most mainstream scientists hang on to these 4 types of rejection of the phenomena, even when scientific evidence suggests that there is something really going on here. Now, Radin uses, this is a brilliant analogy he uses. It's an analogy put forward by the Greek philosopher Plato. Now, Plato used an allegory of prisoners in a cave. So, as the story goes, these prisoners spent their entire lives chained up in a cave in such a way that they could see, or all they could see was the cave wall in front of them. They couldn't see that there was a fire that was glowing behind them, nor that a group of actors were holding up puppets and casting shadows on the wall of the cave. For these prisoners, their entire world consisted of these shadows.
VR was very bad back then.
It really was. One day, a prisoner was released from the cave and taken outside. At first, blinded by the light, after a while his eyes adjusted to the brilliance, and for the first time he saw the vibrant colours and depth of real reality. His former ideas about the world were shattered, and when he was allowed to return to the cave, he excitedly explained to the other prisoners that their shadowy existence was all an illusion. There was a richer, intensely luminous world just a few steps outside the cave. But regardless of what he said or the arguments he used to try and convince them that their reality was a pale cartoon of reality, the other prisoners thought he had gone mad. It's a lovely analogy, that, isn't it?
It is.
He was good, Plato, wasn't he?
Well, it's often that analogy is also used when trying to explain things like hallucinogenic substances and encounters. I didn't use it. We come across it when people try and I think it was, I can't remember who it was who came up with the idea of the machine elves, but that idea of you can contact other entities and they know who you are and they have their own level of existence. You just mentioned it there, the contacting, I think number 3, you said contacting non-corporeal entities. Yeah. So this makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Well, given Radin's interest in the subject and his background, he became keen to conduct research and experiments into psi, or I guess what he'd call real magic. And Ben, this is where the high strangeness begins. So he writes, early in the year 2000, I was searching for office space for a research institute that a colleague, Richard Shoup, and I were establishing. We called it the Boundary Institute because its mission was to scientifically explore the boundaries between mind and matter using the disciplines of physics, mathematics, and computer science. The organisation would continue a programme of psi research that I had been in charge of at a Silicon Valley technology company called Interval Research Corporation, which was funded by Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft. So now, originally, Radin wanted to find somewhere in the heart of Silicon Valley. I guess, that's where you want to be. But the dot-com boom was in full swing, so, it was impossible to get anywhere at any reasonable price. So he ended up in a suburb called Los Altos. Now, after moving furniture into a room that would become my office, he says, I became curious about my neighbours. I found a directory sign listing the office suites. Most were ordinary businesses, but one was named SciQuest Inc. I took this as a delightful coincidence because our new institute was also a sort of SciQuest, namely Psi research of the parapsychological side. There was only a handful of Psi research facilities in the world, and we all knew each other very well. So I was certain that the Psi in SciQuest must have meant something like personal service investigations, something like that.
Yeah. Personal service investigations. Yeah.
He said the Psi similarity was surely an amusing coincidence. About a month later, I took a new route to walk to our offices, and I noticed that the sign on the suite next door to ours, which I hadn't noticed before, was SciQuest Research Labs. I checked every day for the next 2 weeks. Finally, someone was in the SciQuest Labs offices. I knocked and tried the door. It was unlocked, so I entered and prepared to say hello to the man behind a desk. He looked up and his eyes widened as though he'd seen a ghost. I thought maybe he was startled, so I extended my hand and said, Hello, I wanted to introduce myself. I'm your neighbour next door. My name is... But before I could finish, he managed to croak, Dean Radin?
Oh?
I hesitated. Yes, I replied cautiously, wondering how he knew who I was, and if he was feeling okay. He said nothing. He just continued to stare at me. After an uncomfortable pause, I said, I'm your neighbour next door. I just wanted to introduce myself and see what kind of work you do here. After a moment, the man replied, I'm doing what you're doing. Confused, I asked, What do you think I'm doing? He replied, Psi research, parapsychology. Now, it was my turn to stare, he said, dumbfounded. Unbeknownst to me or any of my colleagues around the world, here was another group engaged in the same kind of research that we were, and they were located next door to our new offices.
Wow.
There can't be many look at that time or any time looking at that, right? What a hell of a coincidence.
I love that he's wide-eyed. He's like he's been found out.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, they must have been presumably competing for different pots of funding, but how interesting. I didn't know this about his life.
Well, the weirdness continued, Ben, when Radin was given a tour of this company's offices.
There's pictures of him everywhere. It's like that scene hidden at Alan Partridge.
Yeah.
I'm just a fan.
Yeah, just a fan. Well, the month before all this unfolded, he says, I was focused on visualising what our new office and laboratory space would look like. I was drawing sketches of my ideal lab configuration on the whiteboard in my office and imagining a certain kind of reclining leather chair, a shielded room, and other types of equipment that would be useful to have in the lab. I knew all this would be expensive and our budget was limited, so I figured we wouldn't be able to afford it in the short term. But that didn't stop me from visualising what I wanted. After recovering from the shock of our meeting, John invited me to tour the rest of his facility. As we moved from one room to the next, I could hardly believe my eyes. John had the reclining leather chair, the shielded chamber, and all the other pieces of laboratory equipment I had been actively imagining. And all of it was located on the other side of the wall from my desk, no more than 6 feet from where I had been sketching what our lab would look like. I literally drew what I wanted into being. I mean, I think you could probably argue if you're going to set up that kind of lab, there would be certain things that everybody would want.
You've got a chair?
Yeah, but
I wanted a chair.
The leather reclining chair is probably the weirdest part of it, right?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
But also, Ben, there was a small, very small, synchronistic moment for me on the next page of the book after that story, where Radin is writing about remote viewing and Ingo Swann. and I didn't know this, he says Swan based his picture drawing technique on methods used in the 1880s by British researcher Frederick W.H. Myers. Now, I don't know if you remember, but we talked about Myers' investigation into the Cheltenham ghost a couple of episodes back.
Oh.
He was the guy from the Society of Psychical Research.
Oh, yes, of course.
Who let the young woman, the Morton, aka Miss Morton, write the study. But he was the one who investigated it, which is a small but a little weird coincidence.
It is.
Right? It was on the next page about synchronistic, coincidences.
When you start looking at it, it looks back at you.
Yeah. Well, we'll get onto that as well. Let's get into part of the book that focuses on the scientific evidence for real magic, or psi. Now, Radin talks about a whole host of scientific experiments that he and others have conducted. Now, rightly, Radin goes into great detail about the setup, procedures, and execution of these experiments. I'm not going to relay that. Again, go get the book for that amazing detail. I'm going to focus on what the experiments are trying to explore and the results. But first, I'm going to read Radin's introduction to this section of the book, because I think it's really powerful. The scientific literature relevant to understanding magic has been published in peer-reviewed journals over the past century and a half, he writes. It consists of roughly 3,000 laboratory experiments, each of which involved one or more researchers testing anywhere from a handful to hundreds of participants over years or even decades. With very few exceptions, these experiments were not designed to test magical concepts. They were conducted in the context of applying scientific methods to investigate psi experiences. But when these same studies are viewed through the lens of the esoteric tradition, testing magic is exactly what these experiments were all about. Force of will has been studied in the context of investigating mind-matter interactions, also called psychokinesis. Divination has been studied as variations of clairvoyance or precognition. Theurgy has been investigated in the laboratory, typically in the form of mediumship studies. From a mainstream scientific perspective, the existence of psi phenomenon remains controversial. Some claim that the persistent debate indicates that despite a century of smoke, there's still no fire, and so psi probably doesn't exist. For stronger skeptics, all of the supporting scientific evidence, 100% of it, he says, they say can be due only to flukes, flaws, or fraud.
Yeah. We're very familiar with that explanation.
He says, I'm confident that the dismissive sceptical opinion is wrong. In my opinion, the primary reason for the continuing uncertainty is due to assumptions about the nature of reality that are formalised within the scientific worldview. It's reminded me a lot of Rupert Sheldrake's work, this. It's very similar themes, isn't it? He says, if one completely accepts today's worldview as inviolate or absolute, then the strength and the quality of the evidence for psi simply doesn't matter. The phenomena are considered impossible, and that's it. This may be surprising to those who've been taught that science is a dispassionately rational and evidence-based. Science certainly aspires to be driven by evidence, but as in any domain of human affairs, a few leading figures in each discipline establish fads and fashions that others are expected to follow. Those same figures enforce the status quo by deciding who gets promoted and who gets grants to fund their research. This helps to define the boundaries of each discipline, but of course it also constrains genuine innovation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We've lost so much. Well, we haven't gained so much knowledge because of prejudice.
Yeah. Let's start. Should we get into the experiments?
Yes.
I'm going to start with quantum consciousness. So this is really about observer effect. And we often say on this podcast, both you and me are obsessed with the dual slit experiment or the double slit experiment, whichever way you want to talk about it. We've talked about it many times. And do you remember, we've talked about it a lot with me scratching my head going, it can't be a thing. It just doesn't make sense. Everybody would be looking into this if it was a thing.
Yes, they should be.
Well, he has. So the basic summary is that so for the dual split experiment, what we're talking about here is observer effect. The summary is when we observe something like this dual slit experiment, it changes the outcome, changes the result of the experiment just by us humanly observing it, right? That's the basic concept. So Adrian Kent, Professor of Quantum Physics at the University of Cambridge, proposed that it might be possible that consciousness affects behaviour in quantum systems. Radin and his team in 2008 began experiments looking into this quantum observer effect, and they did it using the dual slit experiment in a number of different ways. Again, I'm not going to go into the different ways they did it because it is quite detailed, but Radin says of the results, overall, our experiments suggested that what Adrian Kent was pondering is in fact true. The overall odds against chance in our series of studies range from a conservative 27,000 to 1 to a liberal 17 trillion to 1, depending on the assumptions used when combining the experimental results. 4 of our double slit systems used continuous beam lasers as a source of photons. 1 used a light source that produced 1 photon at a time. We even ran a series of experiments over the internet to study the role of distance between the participants and the optical system. More than 1,500 people participated in the study over the course of 3 years. Some were as far as 18,000 kilometres away from our laboratory. We found that the distance between the participants and the optical systems didn't matter. The average effects were the same regardless of distance. 2 independent physicists reviewed our raw data from these experiments, and both confirmed that our reported results were correct. Of greater significance, a series of independent replications of our work by a physicist at the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil were also highly successful.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what was he actually doing? He was basically just rerunning the experiment in different ways, and the experiment keeps coming up with the same.
Yeah, he was trying to, what we've said. Is it really a thing? He was trying to do it on a grand scale. Is it a thing? Does it work? And it does.
Yeah, I mean, we covered very much in the early days. There was somebody who was doing it with starlight.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
which that one blew my mind. So where did he go from that? He just kind of proved it and went, oh, I don't know, where do I go now?
Yeah, I think interestingly, he still runs a website and he continues a lot of experiments online now. So that I think you can go and see, all his research data there and participate in experiments yourself. So I'll try and put a link to that in the show notes. So if anyone wants to go and check that out.
Nice.
Well, let's look at another fascinating experiment he did. This was dubbed Blessed Chocolate. Now, I mean, the background of this, we would all agree saying a prayer or blessing food and drink is ubiquitous across many religions. Whether you're saying a blessing before eating, thanking the gods or spirits for their bountiful food, or I guess praying for a good harvest. So this connection with prayer and food is a big thing.
Yeah.
So Radin and his team wanted to see if this is just a symbolic act or does it have a practical purpose, which I think what a great thing to try and study.
How do they even think of that?
Well, let's get on to the experiment. So they conducted a double-blind experiment to see if beneficial intentions, a blessing directed towards chocolate, would elevate the mood of people who ate it more than the exact same chocolate that wasn't blessed.
Wow.
So
now you've said that, I can see where this is going.
What's hilarious, Ben, is Radin said that recruiting people for their experiments was often difficult, but there were no shortage of volunteers who signed up to consume high-end chocolate. So 3 different methods we used to bless the chocolate. A pair of senior Buddhist monks, an electronic device imprinted by 6 experienced meditators, and a ritual performed by an experienced Mongolian shaman.
Brilliant. Of course there would be.
There was a 4th group, a control group, who were given the same chocolate from the same source, but it wasn't blessed. So that seems like a good experiment. They didn't know what they were getting, either group. So let's take a look at the results. Does eating unknowingly blessed chocolate improve your mood? What they found was that by the third day of eating chocolate, the average mood measure had improved more in the groups eating the blessed chocolate than in the control group, with odds against chance of 24-1.
That is crazy.
Now, while this outcome is only modestly significant from a statistical perspective, it suggests that based on the gold, this is what he's saying, it suggests that based on the gold standard design for conducting clinical test, a double-blind, placebo-controlled randomised trial, the blessed chocolate altered subjective mood in a positive way. Then we analysed the subset of individuals who consume less than an average of 3.2 ounces of chocolate per week. This is in their general life. We examined the results of this low chocolate group because they basically thought that people who habitually ate a lot of chocolate might not show much of an effect by eating a little bit more, whereas people who didn't eat much chocolate might be more sensitive to the blessing. So this is mad as well. The subset of non-chocoholics did indeed show a much stronger improvement in mood, with odds against chance of 10,000-1.
10,000-1.
So remember, none of these people had any idea whether they were eating blessed chocolate or not.
No. I mean, this reminds me of kind of people who've studied homeopathy. And, that idea of just imprinting the goodness of something into water can improve your health. And people swear by it. I mean, this is similar-ish.
Yeah, and everyone's kind of kickback against that is it's a placebo
yes,
effect.
Of course,
but this test eliminates the idea of a placebo.
Yeah, it does, yeah.
They also tried the experiment with blessed tea. The results weren't quite as impressive as the chocoholics, but again, the people who drank the blessed teas, mood was better than the control group with odds of 50-1. I guess the next question you got to ask after that, Ben, is, does this only work for humans?
Does this only work for humans?
Good question, Ben. Well, there was a similar experiment tried watering plants with blessed water and others without.
Oh, yeah, come on.
And the plants performed much better with the blessed water.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Over the 4 experiments, the difference in seedling stem length was associated with odds of chance of 38,000,000,000,000-1. Significant increase in anthrocyanin, which I don't know what that is, and chlorophyll were also observed in the gain of functions mutations. The former with odds of chance against chance of 33,000-1, and the latter a mere modest 20-1. This study showed that force of will produced objectively measurable changes in plant growth.
Well, I am stunned. I mean, I have read, not blessed, but people who have done studies about playing music and talking to plants.
Yeah.
And that always seems to have a positive effect. But this is very different.
Yeah.
Absolutely mind-blowing.
And if you think, he goes as far when he in this chapter of the book of going, because some people used to bless food to make sure it wouldn't harm them if there was, there was no toxins or stuff in it. He's like, God, could this actually have an effect?
Yeah.
That's amazing. Ben, have you ever seen the Ted Danson 1996 movie Loch Ness? I know it's random.
No, I have not.
So, where they're a group of kids and they're trying to convince Danson, who's a scientist, that the Loch Ness Monster exists. That's the post-it note. Now, he says in the movie, I have to see it to believe it. And the kids say, no, you have to believe it to see it.
Of course you do.
Now, weirdly, there is a term for this coined by psychologist Gertrude Schermeider, and it's called the sheep-goat hypothesis. Have you ever heard of this?
No.
So Schermeider proposed that people who don't believe in psi subconsciously avoid psi experiences because they don't want to experience them.
Okay.
So this also ties in a bit of when we did remote viewing, where Dan Smith said about fear of psi. Do you remember him saying?
Oh,
that?
yeah, I do remember
Fear
that,
of
yeah.
getting it right.
Yes, I do remember this.
So on the flip side, people who believe in psi want to see it, experience it, so they do.
Okay.
So she turned this idea into what she called a sheep-goat hypothesis, where the skeptics are the stubborn goats and the believers are the acquiescent sheeps.
Ah, okay. I wondered where the sheep and the goat were coming through, yeah.
So let's get into some experiments that suggest that this idea that you have to believe it to see it is actually true.
Okay.
I'm going to start going through some results rather than give the details again of each test, but they use a variety of random criteria for predicting picture cards, images chosen by random number generators, other ESP tests, and remote viewing trials they did with all of this. So in 1993, psychologist Tony Lawrence of the University of Edinburgh reported a meta-analysis of all sheep-goat psi experiments that had used forced choice. The participant is forced to select one out of a set of possible targets, I guess like in the classic ESP cards, right? He found 73 reports by 37 different investigators involving more than 685,000 guesses contributed by 4,500 participants. So he basically put together all the tests that had ever been created. The overall results were strongly in support of the sheep-goat effect, with believers outperforming disbelievers with odds against chance of over 1 trillion to 1.
Okay, that's pretty good odds.
Lawrence concluded that the result of this meta-analysis are quite clear. If you believe in the paranormal, you will score higher on average in forced choice ESP tests than someone who does not believe.
And that was proved.
Basically, of all the research that's been done out there, he collated it all the test results. Now, you can argue, I guess, that there might be flaws, but with all of them. Interestingly, in 2015, psychologist Lance Storm did an analysis conducted after the date of that last study. So he looked at the studies between 1993, when that test before stopped, and 2015. So out of the 49 studies that had been conducted during that period, he found the results were replicated, supporting the sheep-goat effects with odds against chance of 12 million to 1.
Absolutely blinding. I'm lost for words. That's incredible.
Yeah. And like I said, I mean, a critic would go, oh, yeah, there were flaws in the way it was done. There was, yeah, but these are all the tests that have ever been created.
Yeah.
So, yeah, okay, many may be wrong, but, it's fascinating, isn't it?
Really, really, truly is.
Let's look at remote viewing tests run by Radin via his website. So this is a simple remote viewing task. The user sees a blank rectangle in the browser window of his computer and is asked to imagine a photograph that the computer would then randomly select and later display in that same rectangle. After using remote viewing to imagine the photo, the user fills out a short questionnaire. So in terms of data, this is incredible, they conducted 48.5 million trials. Poorer remote viewing performance was associated with lower levels of belief and better performance with higher levels of belief. The results were not as dramatic as some we've talked about, Ben, but they were statistically significant compared with chance.
Okay.
So people who believed they could remote view did better.
Remote view, yeah.
I want to close with an experiment that made even Radin think twice about developing it further. In fact, they decided not to continue the research, and I'll get on to why. And right from the start, those engaged in the experiment were conscious that it could be ridiculed, frowned upon, cause controversy, even seen as dangerous. So the official title for the experiment was a test of traditional magical healing ritual. In reality, Ben, they were going to test whether voodoo, specifically voodoo dolls, worked.
Oh, no. Don't do that.
You can see, right? Whoa, okay,
Yeah.
we need to be really careful with this one.
Oh, and let me guess, it did work, and people's arms were falling off. And
Well, I think that. I mean, you're right. We normally associate the use of voodoo dolls with, I guess, wanting to cause pain, suffering, or misfortune to someone, right? And they were conscious that they didn't want to go down that route. So they devised a test that involved 2 participants at a time, who they named Mulder and Scully, which I thought was funny, but I'm not going to do that now. So they're different groups, but one was using a voodoo doll to try and give the other a massage.
Sure. How does that work?
Well, the sender, the person with the doll, was in a location away from the receiver. They tried this over a number of distances. They even went to the lengths of soundproofing the room so much that, there could be no, anything that could alert the receiver to what was going on. So the receiver, the one without the doll, was wired up to equipment monitoring heart rate, sweat, and blood flow. They took readings of the effects. So, this is how they did it. What they did at first, they took readings of those bodily effects when someone was having a real massage.
Okay.
And were like, can we reproduce those effects? The sender used different techniques on the doll, sometimes imagining massaging the doll's shoulder and hair, sometimes actually massaging the doll's shoulder and hair. So they tried it in different ways. And like I said, they did it in different, within different spaces away from the receiver. The results, Ben, I quote, what we found was that during the actual massage, the real massage, electrodermal activity increased, heart rate decreased, and blood volume increased. So that's what happens to you when you're having a real massage, or to the person who had the real massage. This was the same pattern observed in the voodoo experiments, suggesting that during the ritual, the actions and thoughts of the distant healer were indeed mimicked in the patient, as though the healer and patient were actually touching each other. Now, interesting, Ben, the tests where the sender actually touched the doll were better than the ones where they imagined touching the doll.
Okay, that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's actually crazy. I don't even know what that means. I mean, I know what that means, but I don't know what conclusions to draw.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's something... It makes me think... A lot of this makes me think of, we've talked about this, the universe is connected. And I know it sounds really hippie, but, that kind of almost Carl Jung collective consciousness thing. A lot of it that would be a good explanation for all this, that actually imagining that you're giving someone a massage, in some way the universe gives them some of that feeling.
Yes. But how is an inanimate object transferring this? Did they try it with, I don't know, so something that wasn't a doll, did they try it with, you do it to a pillow?
No, they stopped after that experiment. They did consider continuing the research, but Radin said, I just knew it would be so controversial, and there's a really great bit in the book. It wasn't this test. There were some other side tests that he did, and a major publication, academic publication, picked up on it and published his results and were very, complimentary about it. And then they got complaints from their readership that, they were covering things that were just woo-woo. And they withdrew their support for the paper. And Radin said, normally in that scenario, they have to tell you why. so you can, at least have a chance to correct it or explain why it's not the case. When he tried to talk to them or find out why they'd withdrawn the paper, they wouldn't tell him. They just said, we've done it. And he kept trying to say, look, this is not the way it should be done. And he said the problem with that was everybody then knows you've had a paper withdrawn. So everyone then assumes
you've done something wrong.
You've fabricated or faked something or done something fundamentally wrong, which he hadn't. And that's not why they withdrew it. So it did hurt his funding for a while, that. So he, you can see why they're going, oh, this voodoo thing's interesting. Should we do more of it? No, let's not do any more of that because, it's too far for the mainstream scientific people. So, yeah.
I mean, the implications with that on not just our understanding of the universe, but on even healthcare and how relationships work and our place in the universe. I mean, that just absolutely blows my mind, because that then proves that, well, it doesn't prove, but it highly suggests that you could cause harm in the same way.
Yeah.
And to know that is actually quite dangerous, because these people aren't, unless I've read that wrong or heard that wrong, they're not practitioners of any particular art.
No.
They're just being asked to massage a doll officer.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's... I'm being inarticulate because I really don't know where to go with that. There is nothing... I can't suggest any comeback to that. I can't think of any reason... I can't think of a scientific explanation of what's going on there.
Yeah.
That is extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary.
And I think you've picked up on another point. I mean, what comes across clearly in the book is from his research. Some people are better at this stuff than others, and we've talked about that idea of belief. But even amongst those who believe, some people are much better at it than others within that group. So I guess there are, I don't know, sci superstars, Dad Smith is a really good example. I think I called him Dan Smith earlier. Apologies, Dad. Dad Smith is a really good example of that. But Radin believes and says his research backs up that everyone can do it. It's just some people are better than others. Everyone can do it. He thinks it's, this quote unquote real magic. We all have the ability to do it.
I mean, so when people say other crazy stuff like dolls can read your mind, this makes me think, that stuff that we always know works and science says doesn't, maybe science is wrong.
Well, there is a lot as well about, time. Again, not going into it here because we've done lots of episodes about how time is not what we think it is, and that ties into a collective consciousness. And so I didn't really cover it here. But I was thinking, we talked last week about I had that Vardiga and you've had Vardigas before. That would make sense, wouldn't it? That's to do with the nature of time. I just sensed
it would
someone coming back before they came back because of the way time works. It's not like there's some incredible magic. And it did make me think about this whole thing in the book of it's almost a natural, in Radin's view, it's almost a natural thing that we all have. And I guess a bit like a magic trick, once you know how it works, it's not so mystical or magical anymore. I'm not saying this is a trick, but, I think that is, I like the idea of his reclaiming the word magic in this sense, because it's like, it's not necessarily extraordinary. It's some skill we all have, and some of us are better at it than others. There's no real huge mystery here in that sense.
Yeah, I agree. That's, we were talking about how you use it while you're driving and how you use it in everyday life, almost unconscious. Well, definitely unconsciously. This comes through with it. I mean, my brain is now stuck on, I can touch an inanimate object in the shape of a human, and the human I'm connecting it to is going to feel that. That I find, I mean, I don't really know what I'm going to do with that information.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned
Nothing
that.
bad.
Because in the extra scoop, me and you are going to put a spell on each other for next week.
Oh.
Really simple one. I've got the methodology. There's a whole thing in the book about how you do it. So we're going to go through that, and I'll explain how we're going to do it. We're going to try and aim for something really, really simple and innocuous. So we'll come and join us at Ben and Peter's Extra Scoop at patreon.com/TQM pod to find out all about that.
Listeners, I'm scared.
Let me just do a little conclusion. So what I took from reading the book, Ben, was there is so much evidence from the experimentation that there's something going on here, and though some are better at it than others, psi is something we can all do and have access to. I mean, skeptics would try and find flaws in the methodology, interpretation, the setup of some of these experiments, almost that unconscious bias. He does cover a lot of that in the book. But, we are talking about hundreds, if not thousands, of experiments over decades giving similar results. Some might be flawed, sure, but all of them, really?
Yeah.
I mean, I would really like more skeptic scientists to take the leap and do their own tests, as there can be almost, like a blank dismissal, almost nothing to see here approach, so we're not even going to look at it, Rather than, I'm not saying everybody does this, but rather than just dismissing it, go, well, I'm a scientist who doesn't believe in it. Let me have a look at it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, because nobody is going to really take this seriously until Brian Cox agrees with it.
Yeah.
Generally.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the way the world works.
Yeah.
So we've got to make it so obvious that Brian Cox comes on telly massaging a doll and somewhere 100 miles away somebody goes, oh, that's nice.
Yeah. Well, I've got a Brian Cox voodoo dolls that we're going to massage in the Extra Scoop. You've come across my experiment. No, it's not that. Well, I've barely touched.
It's full of stars.
It's full of stars. To me, Gary, to me. I've barely touched on the content of this book today because I wanted to focus on the experiments. So do check it out for yourself. It's called Real Magic, Ancient Wisdom, Modern Science, and a Guide to the Secret Power of the Universe. And its author is Dean Radin, PhD. So like I said, come and join us at Patreon. We're going to cast secret spells on each other. And my last thing I want to say, Ben, listeners, if you have made it to the end of this episode, especially if you're a new listener, it may be because I put a spell hidden in the artwork for this episode to try and make you listen. So thank you for listening, and I guess thank Real Magic if you have listened this far.
Thank you for listening, and I don't think you did, but if you do feel compelled to come and be a Patreon, even if it's not magic, we'd be very, very grateful, because this stuff is expensive.
Yeah. Not as expensive as a lab in Silicon Valley, but
No, but even so.
Yeah. I'm fascinated. I love doing that, and it's one of those episodes you just go, God, I know we're getting one person's perspective, but, he's been at the coalface of this for a while, and, he may have his own views about it, but there's a lot of data out there that suggests something is going on.
Well, let's see if you can fix my dodgy toe. We'll see you next week.
Yeah, see you next week.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Are you the quantum mechanics?